Hey guys. Okay, so in the last video, y'all heard me use the terms high key and low key. And basically, those are photography terms or cinematography terms that refer to how a scene is lit. And obviously, this is something that as you're creating your scenes in animation, you'll have to think about as well. But I just wanted to give you guys a quick overview of what those terms mean, how you show them, and what is important to keep in mind about them. So, in a high key image, this is an image that has been incredibly overexposed. So, to show, a really high end of the scale, let's look at these buffalo right here, right? They're probably, they're standing in a really bright morning lit scene, or maybe they're in snow, something like that. But as you can see, they've been incredibly overexposed so that we don't see any of the environment they're standing in. We don't see the snow or the ground they're standing on. We don't see the sky. All we see is a little bit of them, of the buffalo themselves. And so, when I go in and try to pull values out of this, let's see if I can get right there. Oops. I knew that was going to put me on one that was right there. Okay, so they're, still at the very high end of the scale. I'm just going to try to get off of this buffalo right here. I mean, that is super high, right? It's actually probably not even the square that I'm putting it under. It's actually probably more like right there. Let me try to get some of the dark off of here, and we'll see where that plots out to. Maybe right there. This is going to be right there. Here we go. There's a little bit of dark, but as you can see, I had to really dig in until I could find it. It's probably going to come in somewhere down here. I would say probably in between those two. So there is dark in the image, right? But let's see if I can pull out one more, because I'm betting there's some. No, that's still right there. Actually, that's probably right there. Yeah, even this range, I'm sitting here thinking, oh, this is going to be, down here a little bit. Nope. All of the pieces that I could pull up, they're all way up here at the high end of the scale. There is, like I said, there's a little bit that's coming in down here at the bottom, down in the shadow. And that is what is key to keep in mind about a high key image. In a high key image, there will be very little detail in the highlights or light areas of the pieces. All of the detail will be in the shadow areas of the pieces, or the parts that any kind of dark tone shows up. So you can see this exemplified here in our buffalo, right? There is almost no detail here in the ground. I mean, a little bit we can see there's probably some grass, probably some pieces of grass right here. Get a layer I can draw on. Probably some pieces of grass right here popping up, but we really only see that because it's over the back of the buffalo, right? Again, here on their back, we can see a little bit of the fur, but we actually only see that because of the shadow that's on the buffalo themselves. So the detailed areas of this high key piece show up in the shadow. So here, we can see the buffalo's eye right here, right above me, his nose, his little beard. But these are all the parts of the image that are the shadow of the image. So in a high key image, you can say high key equals details in shadow. And in the highlights, there's no detail. Now let's take a look at how this works out in a piece that is not black and white, right? So I've got this high key painting right here. And as you can see, the same thing is kind of working. We've got, the sky, which is probably, way up here on the end. This yellow, again, actually maybe a little bit darker than the blue, but is still way up here. They're kind of in the same value range right next to each other. The road, way up here at the high end of the scale, right? This building here, even higher. Well, kind of about this now. Right about here. But everything in this image, if we go back and put this across our value scale, it's all right here, way up at the high end of the scale, right? But now if we get into the shadow that's in the image, so here in the tree where it starts to get a little bit darker, now we're starting to see our darker range of value come out. And on the wagon, of course, there's really dark pieces popping out. You know, this blue is a very dark dynamic color, the darkest in the piece. So you can see that for the most part, this image stayed in the high key, you know, way up on the high end of the value scale, except for the few places that the artist wanted to bring your eye to, which was right here around the wagon and in the tree a little bit. So right here around the wagon, right here in the tree, you know, right here a little bit on the side of the road. But for the most part, all of this is leading our eye back to this wagon right here. So that's an example of a high key image, okay? Now, let's look at what a low key image will do. Put in our low key image right here, image of a kitty cat. Okay, so in a low key image, this is an image that is underexposed. So instead of the light being blown out in it, it's going to lean on dark tones and lots of shadow. There's not very much light, and the light that is in it is going to stay almost exclusively at the bottom end of the value scale. So as you can see here in the image of the cat, right, we've got a lot of darkness. Oops, got to get my layer visible again. We've got a lot of dark image. You know, this is way down here at the bottom. We'll try to go up a little bit lighter here. I have a feeling I'm like right there. Let's see if I can get right here on this tiger stripe. See where this plots out. This is probably going to be a little more in the middle. Yeah, right about there. Right here, I bet that's the same. It's actually a little bit darker even, I would say. Let's put this right here. So as you can see, the primary values in this low-key image are, you know, way down on the bottom end of the value range, way down in the dark tones. Now, this image obviously does have some light tones, just a few here. This is going to obviously be way up here, very light, way up here. This gray, probably right about, might even be a little bit darker than that right there. So there's one or two tones that are way up at the high end of the scale, but the majority of them are down at the dark end of the scale. And to be honest with you, in a low-key image, you can even just work on this end of the scale, okay? Because you're going to be using these, you know, you'll use this gray right here as your highest level, your brightest bright. Everything below it, this bright, even though it's in the middle of the scale, this kind of mid-gray will seem very light because it's put against all those darker tones. Now, it's perfectly okay to pull out some white on the image. That's 100% fine. But what you're, in a low-key image, what you're leaning on is all those shadows and dark tones. You're going to let that take over the image. Just like on the high-key image, you leaned on the light side of the scale. You let all those light, high-gray values take over the image. Now, we talked about how in a high-key image, the details are in the shadow. Well, the opposite is true on a low-key image. On a low-key image, the details are in the highlights. So you can see here on our kitty cat, his whole side that is in shadow. Here, all this that's in shadow, there's hardly any detail. We can't even see. We are relatively certain that his ear comes down here and his head fills out this scene, right? But we don't see that at all. In fact, it's entirely gone. There is nothing there to indicate that this cat has, the right side of his head. Where we see the details are over here on the highlight side, where the side where the light is hitting. And this is where, his eye pops out. You can see the hairs in his ears. You can see his whiskers better. Even here where the whiskers show up on this shadow side, the whiskers are only showing up kind of like the same way the grass did with the buffalo. The whiskers are showing up because they're in contrast to the shadow. So there's there's just no detail here. The minute we get into the shadow on this side of his ear, we lose the hairs. They just completely go away. The minute we get into shadow down here under his neck, we lose the little hairs that are under his neck. They completely go away. So that's the thing that you've got to keep in mind about a low key image. Low key equals details in highlight. Now let's take a look at what this looks like in a color piece. All right, so we got this villainous guy right here, right? And we can see, let's pull out again, let's get our dark tones, They're way down here, even this dark blue, still just about black. We'll get in here and get some of this dark red. All of this practically black, right? Work even harder to get that off of his hair, but I still think I'm coming up with black. Let's go a little bit lighter. Let's get right here off his suit jacket. You guys can see all of these I'm pulling out, they're way down there at the bottom end of the value scale. Try to go into some of this mid-tone here on the wood paneling behind him. I'm getting a little bit, maybe a tiny bit brighter there. Barely. I'm basically moved off of black to dark brown. And here, I've moved off of black to, dark blue. But obviously, there are some bright spots on the illustration. I can pull off, his makeup right here. This is going to come out, kind of at probably somewhere right about in there. It's probably where it is, so definitely not up at the high end of the scale, more in the middle, middle on the high side, but still in the middle of the value scale. And this is the brightest part of the piece, right? Right here, this is the brightest part of the piece. Let's try this orange right here. It's actually pretty dark. When it's there in contrast to all of the dark around it, it looks brighter. But when you pull it out by itself, it's doesn't really belong up there at the high end. It belongs down here with these guys, all down here in the dark. So you guys can see how even in a colorful piece, just like on our high key image, the director is using, or the artist is using, this little bit right here, a little bit of high value, this brighter value that was on his makeup skin tone, to bring our eye right here to this part of the piece, okay? Because we've got, his eyes are really in dark shades against that white skin. That's the highest point of contrast in the piece, so that's where our eye goes to. But overall, we've got such a dark tone around the whole thing that even that white does not have to be that bright to get it to stand out. And just like in the cat here, obviously the artist is bringing her eye right here to the cat's eye. This has got the highest point of contrast because it's got, all of this white around it and then this dark for the shadow under the eye. But while it's important to keep that in mind, just like I said in the first video, where am I going to put my highest point of contrast to draw the eye to? When you think about high key and low key, they're really about setting the tone for a piece. So in a low key image, it brings out, danger, mystery, sadness, kind of your, dark, dangery ends of the emotional scale. You know, it can be calmness, it can be sleep, it can be peacefulness. This would probably depend on the other elements in the illustration. But right away, it just gives a sense of, you know, kind of mystery and danger and unknown. Whereas in a high key piece, high key images give a sense of calmness, happiness, unknown, but in a good way, as if we are setting off into, you know, the sunset at the happy ending of a movie. When everybody rides off into the sunset, you have this sense of accomplishment. High key images can have a sense of foreboding, but again, that might depend on the other elements in the piece, right? So if you had like a snowy scene where a blizzard was closing in all around us, it would probably depend on the expressions that the characters had in the scene. Because what you would be doing there is closing everything out with a whiteness of the blizzard, just to show how overwhelming the snow is, and you would have to count on their expression between characters to say, we're in a dangerous place. This is not good that we're being covered in snow. But in general, you want to think about that, where your value end of the scale is. It's just like when I talked about in class about the sloping up this way. When the slope slopes up like this is rising action. Something good is happening. We're at the beginning. We're taking off. When the slope slopes this way, this is falling action. We're at the end. Something bad, something's crashing. Okay, those two things compositionally signify kind of the opposite of each other. And a high key and low key piece, high key indicates calmness, serenity, peacefulness, the end of the action. And a low key piece indicates the beginning of the action, darkness, mystery, danger. Okay, so that's it for this video. And the next one, we're going to talk about shading a cube and a sphere.